that Murray Lane was so committed to will finally be in place.
Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've said a lot of things in this House about what I think of the National Party's policies, of the direction that they are taking this country in. It's been highly critical, Mr Williamson, and I believe those things strongly. But I never thought I would have to stand up in this Parliament and say to the National Party, why are you denying a group of New Zealanders the right to have a say in how they are governed in their region? I never thought I would have to stand up in this House and say to the National Party, what is it about democracy that you don't like? Because that's what's here today, Mr Speaker. That's what's on the table today, is the National Party denying a group of New Zealanders their democratic right to vote for the people who govern them. The people of the Canterbury region have been through enough. They deserve the right to elect the people who will make important decisions on their behalf, instead of this national government deciding that democracy does not matter in their region. Mr Speaker, it is an unbelievable situation that the National Party think it's okay to take away the democratic rights of hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders. Mr Speaker, when we look at the reasoning that we've heard today from David Carter for why this should happen, it is facile. And the reasoning that Mr Carter actually gave us today was about what was happening before 2010. Now, we can argue, and we will argue, about that. But the question Mr Carter has to answer is, so there was a problem in his mind with the way the council was operating previously, he'll put in place commissioners. He can't continue to mount that same argument. Different people will put their names forward. All sorts of people could end up being elected to the regional council. It's not the same circumstances as it was, but Mr Carter continues to justify taking away democratic rights on the basis of what a previous council did. It's time for the people of Canterbury to be given back their democratic rights, and no case has been made in this House by the National Party for why they shouldn't be given their rights back. Mr Speaker, the regulatory impact statement makes absolutely clear what the problem is here, and that is that this approach that the national government is now taking is denying democratic rights. But more than that, it actually defers the resolution of the problems that the government think exist. Paragraph 87 of the regulatory impact statement says, it defers resolution of the current problems as it provides no clear exit mechanism from the intervention. This government doesn't know where it's going on this. It's got appointed commissioners in place, extended out to 2016, and no exit mechanism. Now, the government even had the option on the table from officials to go to a halfway house. Not quite democracy, but at least on the way to democracy. And that was to have a mixed body of appointed people and elected people. Not ideal in our view, but at least a step towards some kind of democratic process. Nick Smith liked this. He went and said to Federated Farmers that this was a good option. The officials said it was a good option, but Mr Carter said no. And a cabinet paper's gone up that goes against those officials' recommendations. We'd like to see it, Mr Carter. Would be good to release that sometime so we can actually see what the justification is. But instead, no, Mr Carter wants to deny us all the right to know what the justification was, going against the advice of officials. And as my colleague Annette King has already said today, and as David Carter actually said during question time last week, it's clear because it's part of a wider agenda. It's part of a wider agenda of getting rid of regional councils, of taking away representation at a regional council level from New Zealanders all across this country. But no, Mr Carter won't release that paper to us. Well, Mr Speaker, there was another Labour politician who once said if you ever wanted to find out where things were at, you should follow the money. Well, in the case of the ECAN and the Canterbury Regional Council, actually that should be follow the water. Because that's what you should actually do if you want to see what's happening here. Indeed, because that is where the water is. And let's be absolutely clear what this bill does. This bill continues the process whereby the appointed commissioners control all the decisions about water. They control all the decisions about water, and individuals' rights to appeal those decisions to the Environment Court are gone. under this legislation. They have extended the fact that the only thing that is allowed are appeals on points of law to the High Court. So the decisions around water conservation orders are gone from the public process into the hands of commissioners. That's what this is about, Mr Speaker. It's about controlling that very valuable resource in Canterbury in the interests of certain people and not in the interests of the wider Canterbury region. That is disgraceful. Decisions about water are vital for the future of the Canterbury region, and this minister, with this piece of legislation, is continuing to exclude the people of New Zealand from their right, the people of Canterbury from their right to question those decisions in the Environment Court and putting those in the hands of the Commission. It is disgraceful, Mr Speaker. But this is a pattern from this government, going right back to my very first days in this House with the legislation around the Auckland Council. This government is denying the democratic rights of New Zealanders right across the country when it comes to local government, but also in the way it's running other things, work and income. I wouldn't be surprised, in fact I'd lay some money, that at some point Paula Rebstock will become a Commissioner for Environment Canterbury. And that's when the people of Canterbury know they're in trouble, because Paula Rebstock, she's in running a board for WINS, she's in running ACC now. At some point she'll become a Commissioner for Environment Canterbury, because she is the person who brings governance, not democracy, Mr Speaker, governance to these organisations. This is a disgrace, Mr Speaker. Now, nobody underestimates the impact of the earthquakes on the Canterbury region, and every member of this House understands the importance of working alongside the people of Canterbury, and it was why Jerry Brownlee's comment in the House today directed at Leanne Dalziel was so disgraceful, because Canterbury MPs of all parties have worked very hard on behalf of their constituents. But the fact is, once again, this government is using the earthquakes as a smokescreen for another issue. And I challenge government members to get up and tell me exactly what impact the earthquakes have had on whether or not the Commissioner's mandate should be extended. What exact things have not been done and not achieved by the Commissioners because of the earthquake? Because the threshold, Mr Speaker, for denying democratic rights should be so high as to be almost impossible, not just because they haven't quite completed the things that the government wanted, not just because the government prefers to deal with Commissioners than to deal with councillors. When this first happened, Nick Smith said one of the reasons that the government went ahead with this proposal was because they were worried about the outcome of the elections. Well, I've said it before in this House, Mr Speaker, I was quite worried about the outcome of the 2008 election, but I didn't advocate cancelling it. I didn't decide it should be cancelled. And there are countries all around the world where people cancel elections, and members on that side of the House have given dozens of speeches and comments about Fiji and other countries where elections have been cancelled or elections have been delayed. Well, I'll lay another bet with you, Mr Speaker. I reckon there'll be an election in Fiji before there's an election for Environment Canterbury. And what does that say about those members on the other side of the House? They sit there and they judge other countries where elections don't happen, but this government sits here and says, we'll cancel an election for Environment Canterbury because we didn't like what was going to happen in that election. And what's more, they will carry on with this process of having commissioners denying the democratic rights of Canterburyans against the advice of their officials, against the advice of most New Zealanders who would want to see their fellow countrymen and women given the opportunity of electing the people who govern them. Mr Speaker, this bill is an outrageous attack on democracy. There is no two ways about it. The Labour Party will oppose this bill throughout. And I join my colleague Annette King in urging the people of Canterbury. Maybe there were some problems with Environment Canterbury before the commissioners were put in, but that is no excuse to deny Canterburyans the right now to be able to elect the people who represent them. That is a fundamental principle of this House. It is a fundamental principle of New Zealand that people get to elect their representatives. It's called democracy. The National Party is denying it to the people of Canterbury.
Eugenie Sage.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. This euphemistically titled Environment Canterbury Temporary Commissioners and Improved Water Management Bill